Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more information about how to join at officehours.global. First hour is generally just general discussion around media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we'd like to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we have Andy and Jonathan from Liminal. They've been on here before with us, and they're going to be breaking down an incredible event that they produced and kind of tearing it apart and showing you how it all comes together. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the Behringer Flow 8. We've got a couple people here using it, and it's getting really popular. So we're going to talk about what it does, why it's important, and how to use it. On Wednesday, we're returning to the Ruthless Review. So we're going to come back and kind of work on everyone's. We're getting, as Andy keeps on getting closer and closer and closer to our Office Hours 2.0 implementation, we have to keep on upping our game as we get ready for the new execution there. So we're going to be talking about that again. Thursday, we're going to talk about how to break in, to any industry that you're looking at, and how we've done it, and how we got into something, and how we kind of wedged our way into something. So we're going to talk a little bit about that on Thursday. Now, Friday, we're going to come back to Isadora. We had a after hours that was incredible with Tlaloc, and we decided we need to move it to the second hour so that we can all talk about Isadora again, kind of reintroduce people to it. And we'll be doing more after hour sessions. So I would definitely check it out. And of course, education on Saturday. We don't stream that, so you want to make sure you're there. Also at noon, we will be going back to the Accidental Theater in Belfast, the Belfast Method. And so, so stay tuned for that as well. All right, let's get going. Bill, what do we got?
Here we go. We start with a question from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. Mitchell on the panel this morning. What are the best settings in Zoom to get the highest resolution from a single client call? I'm anticipating using ZoomISO, but for now, what works best?
Go ahead, Andy.
So the calculation on this has changed a little bit in the past couple of weeks as Sam's team from Pro Events has sort of been badgering the the support team in terms of how they allocate this. So it now should be possible for anybody on any account level who's involved in event production to get at least 720p by just sending in a support ticket. Now, if you need 1080p, apparently now there's going to be a system where you can request 1080 for certain events. I believe that applies on the Pro license. So if you in the past hadn't been able to get 1080 as a Pro user, they would tell you get your business license, get your 10 keys and all of that, and it would be very expensive. You may have a route now, say, hey, my events are this, and this date, and they'll give you 1080 for that period of time. And then finally, a quick note on using ZoomISO in the future. ZoomISO doesn't change the resolution that your Zoom meeting is able to occur at. It simply gives you a drop-down list that lets you choose which resolution you want which user at, assuming that the meeting is going to be able to deliver that. So bringing ZoomISO into a 360p meeting and selecting 1080 for the output will give you a 1080 feed, but it'll be a 360 feed scaled to fill the 1080 display. So just be aware of that ZoomISO is not going to solve that problem for you.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and just to add to what Andy mentioned, if you want to get a cleaner aperture, or actually a fully clean aperture, you can get a Zoom Room license and do NDI feeds out of that Zoom Room and be able to feed that into your Vision Mixer, or even not use NDI and use a second display on a Zoom Room to get a little cleaner interface.
Yeah, we take HDMI out of our computers and have nearly a perfectly clean interface. And one little connection icon that's down there drives us crazy. But what's nice about that is also that we can, from the Zoom Room, we can have the person speaking as well as the any presentation that they have coming in as two inputs into our system. So we can simply switch back and forth, create super sources, etc. Next question.
Comes from Eddie Scott in Mission Viejo, California. And Eddie asks, is there a difference between the new Bitly link and the old click here to join link for office hours?
Yeah, so the Bitly link that you get is for someone to sign up if they haven't signed up. The click here to join link is for you. So that identifies you as you coming in. You don't want to share with other people the click here to join, because that is going to go through your system, as opposed to the Bitly, which is a general registration link. Next question.
John Barker of Malmo, Sweden, our friend, is back, and he says, does anyone have experience with Yellow Duck RTMP streaming to Instagram?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yes, very limited. I wouldn't recommend saying that you can do it, because it can break the end user licensing agreement with Instagram. But yeah, it works.
The rumor is that Instagram is on the border of, this is the rumor, not official word, and I do not speak for Instagram, but the rumor is they're almost given up on the idea of blocking people's RTMP. So the chances of getting blocked from it have dropped, and they were relatively low even for the last couple of years. It's a stupid idea that they had around keeping people from being able to stream directly to Instagram, and I think they've kind of given up, because mostly for the high profile individuals, they do it. so it's a silly thing that they've been doing for the last couple of years, and I think they're going to give it up. So I think that you're probably pretty good. I still would not do a high profile event to Instagram, without doing just the what we call the analog loop, which is having a camera shoot a monitor. That's the safest way. You'll never get blocked, and it takes a little setup, but it works perfectly. But it is, I haven't heard of anyone in the last 2 years being blocked because they were using Yellow Duck. So, and I might know. So it's pretty unusual. Next question.
Comes from Ari Block in Tel Aviv, and Ari asks, Post-Production World is putting on a 5-day online event in association with NAB, October 9th through 13th. Is anyone planning to attend?
Go ahead, Chris.
Not specifically, but I will say this about what FMC does. One, it sounds a little silly to say in association with NAB when NAB is not happening. I realize there's some dates on the calendar, but what's the point? I've spoken with FMC, and I was like, you don't have to be associated with NAB. You can be, completely independent. I also think they do a really good job. They did a great job the first time, and then they also do the Final Cut Creative Summit, which is going to happen, I think, in November. And I will say that from a attendee point of view, sitting at my computer, looking at you sharing your screen, it's like everybody has a front row seat. It really is better, but I would recommend it. I am not specifically signed up for anything yet.
Go ahead, Ari.
So I found this, but I want to qualify that when I said in association with NAB, I just meant that I saw their logo here. So it says produced by NAB Show. I don't know what that means, but I followed the Facebook page, and it seems to be a lot of interesting content here. I've marked several of the sessions at least to try and watch, and I'll drop the link in Mukana.
Go ahead, Bill. For
many years, Future Media Concepts has been the producer of Post-Production World at NAB, and for decades, it was really the place where you went for corporate-style training in the production arts. And it was often driven by the fact it was an expensive add-on. It usually be a few $100s to add on a Post-Production World ticket, but a lot of corporations would send their media teams there to get training in the latest techniques. They ran certifications for the software. They ran, before the NAB started, even practical demonstrations where they'd go out and take a satellite truck or production facilities into the desert and let you get hands-on with things like that. So it's been a long time, well-operating machine for training and associated with NAB. They really know what they're doing, and I think they're great people, and so I'm looking forward to that. They are, like everybody else, making this move into digital from a tradition of in-person training, and I think they're doing it as well as anybody.
I think FMC is doing a great job. In fact, I'm getting to the point where I enjoy the online ones better than I enjoyed going to the ones that they had at NAB. So they went from, the first one was a little rough around the edges as they kind of worked through it. But every single one of them, they get better and better and better. And I think that they're really paying attention to all little details, and basically you get to watch this without all the cheap AV that we get from the venue. And so in the kind of semi-trained staff that is not under FMC's control, that doesn't really know how to plug everything in. So I think that it actually improves the experience. All right, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, you and I were both at iJustine's conference, which was, Justine was great.
Yeah. The AV was such a disaster that it's literally why I won't. Justine's event, except for Justine and all the cool people who showed up. And her presentations were amazing, and she's amazing, and all the people that showed up, it was a great group of people, but the AV was so bad, it was why I won't do it anymore. Like I literally won't show up in person anymore. I was just. But
even like 4 or 5 months later, or maybe it was a little more, when FMC did Post-Production World 2020, even as rough as it was
better.
It was better.
It was better. And it just keeps getting better, and they just keep on refining it. And I think that Ben's doing a great job at tying that down. So Ben and Liat are pushing it really hard. And so it's really, really great to watch them build that up. Next question.
Rizal F. Haraldi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in Tempe, Arizona, says, any recommendations on physical Zoom mute buttons? I found this product through a Google search. Has anyone used that product before? And that's something called Mute Me, I think.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, Mute Me is a cute little button. I would absolutely suggest a Stream Deck, though. And you can see right down here on the bottom left, I've got my little mute button for Zoom. And when I press that, you won't be able to hear me anymore.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, the Stream Deck I use as well, but I use this little box, the Mute Cube, or as I call it, the John Idelson box, because John introduced it on After Hours months and months ago. It's the Idelson box, but Mute Cube is its actual name, and it works really, really well.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I have 3 different ways to go. First of all, yes, I do have the Stream Deck. I had 2 Stream Decks, one on my left and one on my right. Both have mute buttons. Primary is always going to be my mouse because, especially in things like this where you need exact preciseness. Other than that, hardware, a lot of mixers. My X32 has the option to do macro, and where you can program a button to do a hardware mute, and then I can do it that way. But for the most part, everything goes through my mouse first and foremost.
Good, Bill.
Every day on the show, I use one of these, and this is a Rolls little mic mute. The thing that I like about it is you can tactily know when the button is up versus when the button is down. So physically, my finger on it tells me whether I'm live or not, as opposed to the software buttons, which are all great. They do their job, but I just can't tell what state it's in when I come to it.
I'm going back to Studio Technologies announcer box. I just can't decide which one yet.
So you got money.
We talked about it over the weekend.
They're fabulous.
And they're not the cheapest thing in the world, but they also have Dante. So I can literally just plug an Ethernet in the back and set up all my routing and everything else with my mixer. And so and I've used them for a decade, and they've been around for a decade more than that. so they're kind of the industry standard when it comes to that. Next question.
Dan Huber in Erie, Pennsylvania is up next. He says, does anyone regularly use the streaming encoder built into the ATEM Extreme, or is another device preferred?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yes, I do, and I like it quite a bit. I use the dedicated SDI alternative, which is the Web Presenter HD, on my regular streaming things. But as far as I'm concerned, the technology is nearly identical.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I don't use devices that do multiple things. I don't trust devices that say that they can do that, because I've been burned before. So I use a separate encoder, and it also helps with points of failure. So if you have one device doing 5 things and that device goes down, like 5 things went down for you. So that's something to consider when doing that in a device. It all depends on the show itself.
Mickey.
Yeah, we've been using ATEM Mini Pro's streaming out for GEMS projects. ATEM Mini Pro's streaming out to streaming bridges for our contribution feeds, and it's been highly successful so far.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat where I have a tendency to want to separate things out. Mostly so if something goes wrong, I can work on it and be able to put something else out to make it work. But I ran it a couple times. I have both of mine are Pro and an Extreme, and ran it a couple times. It worked perfectly. It's not my style. Next question.
James in Dublin, Ireland is up next. Is the Amazon Fire TV Cube a good Zoom remote contribution device? What are the pros and cons of using it over other options?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I tested this a couple weeks ago when Guy first suggested it. You're basically putting in a docking 4-port dock, USB dock to bring in a camera and bring in other devices. It's harder to do anything with muting and unmuting. The IR remote needs to have that IR cable attached to it, or else you're just sitting there trying to get the remote to work. It's not that great. It does a great job. It brings the video in 720. It's a USB webcam type style. I've tried some different cameras. Not all cameras will work that well with it. And it's otherwise, if you're doing like a room setup or something like that, it might be a good solution. But there are a few things. And one more thing, there's HDMI in or out, but there's no optical. So if you're trying to set it up to something a little bit more powerful, like a sound system, it's not going to do it.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jacob Goodnight, and Jacob asks in Indianapolis, does anyone have experience using the Ubiquiti UniFi UDM Pro to provide redundant internet failover? What's the delay to failover, and is this sufficient for production, or should I look to a different device?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, the UniFi and also the Edge gateways take about 30 to 40 seconds to fail over. They do a repeated ping to a Ubiquiti server, and that's how it determines if it's online, if that WAN connection is online or offline.
Go ahead, Jason.
That pretty much covers it. I use the Ubiquiti Edge router for failover, and it seems to be a little bit faster than that. Keep in mind, you have to be continuously streaming with a fallback in order to actually have no failover for production. It's not quite the same as what you think of as failover, with respect to a web connection. But yes, I do use both. In fact, I'm on a Ubiquiti Pro, at least not the little one, the rack mount one right now.
I mean, usually we look for a slightly lower latency between the failover, but as you lower that latency, you increase the chance of it doing it accidentally. but yeah, if it bouncing back and forth, so that's the big issue there. Next question.
Todd Rains in Allen, Texas is up next. A friend is using vMix and is wanting to record externally. She bought a Blackmagic Video Assist, but not sure she wants a full screen monitor pass-through dedicated to it. Will vMix record externally in any other way?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, there's two easy ways to accomplish this. I normally use the Shogun you might be able to see sitting behind me on a second video card with HDMI out, and just set that to the broadcast standard I want to record in. That's a real simple way and will be able to work with the BM Video Assist. The other way is to enable NDI out of the main, have a separate computer, and just use the NDI viewer and hit record in that, and that will get you a nice recording as well.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. That's what I was going to say. The biggest thing is if you decided to do the monitor, I did it for many years with my Video Assist until it died, is just watch where your mouse is, because that's usually the only artifact that gets in the way of anything like that.
Yeah, I've recorded so many things with a mouse somewhere in the screen. I actually had to roto it out for an interview, and somehow at the last minute we had moved a bunch of things, and all of them had a mouse somewhere hidden in the frame. Fortunately, it didn't go over their head, and I had to literally go in and roto out because the camera was moving a little bit, so you had to roto out the mouse. Anyway, next question.
Noah Sargent comes to us from Fullerton, California. Again, is it safe to power on or off lights that have a built-in switch from a power strip? Is there any safety mechanism I'm bypassing by turning on and off the power switch and leaving the light in the on position?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It depends on the fixture or the instrument. In my case, I've got a light panel Astra softbox, and the power switch on it is a little fiddly. Oops, sorry about that. Is a little fiddly, and I prefer to power it from the power strip. I have a master switch that turns everything on, so I can walk in the room and roll it in. So, as far as I know, there's no issues with that unless the manufacturer says otherwise.
Good, Stuart.
Turning it off is fine and won't cause any problems. Turning it on can be an issue if the inrush current of all the devices on the power board exceed the fuse rating of the safety switch in the power board, in which case it'll trip out. But yeah, turning them off, fine. Turning them on, it's better to do it one by one.
Bill?
Big lights, I don't do it. Anything small, anything LED, anything DC that takes modest current, I'm fine with that going through a switch panel because it's drawing very little. When you get up to HDMI lights and the big guns, big tungsten things, I don't want to do those through a switch because sometimes the cycling of heat and cold messes them up.
I assume you meant HMI instead of HDMI.
Oh, did I say HDMI?
It's a new kind of light. It projects an image onto a screen. It might actually work. The HDMI light. Yeah,
sorry,
it's just called a monitor.
Hydrangea mercury iodide.
You know, a 2000 nit monitor would probably make a good HDMI light. Next question.
Next question comes up from Hasmuk, and he says, my entire learning and investment has been on the Zoom platform with ZoomOSC, ZoomISO, Companion, ATEM, MixEffects, and so forth. Corporates I am targeting are on Teams. What's the ramification?
Go ahead, Andy.
One of the things I'll tell you out of the gate is that Team has made some really good moves in the past couple of months here in terms of being suited for production. Not only do you have those individual NDI outs, as of yesterday, I believe now you have the Blackmagic outputs. You can go out to a deck link from Teams now, which is a pretty good move on their part. So you'll find a warm embrace on the Team side of the coin for sure. But there'll be first party offerings, which will be nice.
Yeah. Sky.
Right tool for the job. If you are familiar with that tool, use it, but you may not want to be able to let them know that that's how you're doing your back end, simply because corporations are very interested in security. They've well invested into this process or systems that Microsoft is providing them. And again, Teams is a suite of tools, not just video production or video access. So that's where it's a language. Understand that you really own the Zoom language, the communications within that. You will be communicating it to a different organization with kind of their own lexicon.
The hard part is whether you can even run Zoom in a corporate environment that doesn't want it. You know, if they build around Teams, a lot of times they've locked it all down except for Teams. And so that's really the challenge. And so we've dealt with that where we've needed to bring someone in over Teams or WebEx because that's what the corporate has locked everything else down. So you may need to work with Teams. I will say that to date, I think that, you know, so I think that Teams started 100 miles behind Zoom. To date, they've moved faster. You know, so I don't think they've caught up with Zoom, but I think they're moving faster at the moment than Zoom is. I think that Zoom could easily pull away again.
They're spending a lot of effort from the top down.
An enormous amount of investment in Microsoft. That is, I mean, it's stunning, like how much development they're doing around broadcast support. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. During the Belfast concert, we had issues with too many connections to the ATEM and dropped commands. Would there be an N input, one output TCP proxy that would only present one stream to the ATEM and then let an operator choose which input goes through?
Go ahead, Andy.
Richard, maybe you can help me out with understanding this. Was the issue because you had multiple people using the same software trying to control the ATEM, or did you have ATEM OSC and MixEffects talking to the ATEM at the same time?
We had everything at the same time. No, I mean, it's not so much a problem. I wouldn't, in the way that Douglas has categorized it, I wouldn't characterize it as in that way, because we know that the ATEM has a hard limit on how many connections, and we were managing that. But at one specific point, the ATEM froze on inputs, and now we think in the debrief that we had today, we've worked out why, and we're going to do some testing around it. We think it's to do with a couple of different interactions, and particularly around how the ATEM is set on AB rather than direct input. And we saw this in one of Jim's sessions before, where when he was set for direct input, it locked the preview, but it didn't lock the program. So we could actually do a direct input switch on the program, but we couldn't do anything on the preview. And I think that's what we experienced on Saturday.
Gotcha. Because one of the reasons I asked is because on the Office Hours 2.0 system with the Constellation, originally I had both MixEffect and ATEM OSC trying to communicate in there, and every now and then I would lock it up. But now that MixEffect has all of the OSC commands that you could possibly want that used to exist in ATEM OSC, I think you can deprecate ATEM OSC and just use the new MixEffect update, and you should be able to get all the same functionality. You might have to do some refactoring of the specific command that you're using, but you'll have super sources and bus control all from one app. So it would simplify the number of connections, I think.
And I do think that the future is going to be us basically abstracting interaction with the ATEM to something that isn't not having a bunch of people interacting with the ATEM directly, and finding ways that we can kind of flow and that's what we're kind of talking about with Office Hours 2.0, is to not have a whole bunch of people interacting with the ATEM, but figuring out how do we kind of abstract that layer away from that process. Next question.
Jan Landy here on the panel, back from Phuket, Thailand this time, looking for an excellent streaming app for Android to Mac, similar to epoccam or Canvo, that works on iPhone. Any ideas?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, the app that I used before to show is called Camo. It's from Reincubate, and it has to be plugged in, but it's very, very nice. Very solid. Haven't had any drops.
Go ahead, Tony.
If you have access to the ATEM Mini, Filmic Pro is a good solution for being able to use the iPhone as a streaming device.
And I think that Filmic Pro you can do an AirPlay to like an Apple TV as well. from Filmic Pro as well that does full aperture. So it's kind of how I create wireless cameras with my phones. Next question.
James Brooks in New York City. What would be the recommended separate hardware encoder for streaming? Thanks.
Go ahead, Stuart.
I'll leave SDI choices to other people, but personally, I can recommend the FM User FBE 200, which is right under my VG 900 Sony camera right now. The Uray encoders, again, are a fairly reliable product. I've got one and I've had one for a couple of years and it's been reliable. I have not yet checked the XVist ones that are on the Amazon store that are a bargain in price, but they appear to have all the functions that the Uray and the FM User ones do.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There's many different choices. Of course, the panel here is a big fans of Blackmagic, and just bringing in something like an ATEM Mini to use as a streamer. But there's other companies. I know Epiphan has them. You have Aja that has them, however you pronounce that. Teradek has them. If you want to go wireless, then you can go Live View or something like that. And then, but you're going to probably pay, that's around the $800 to $3,000 range if you're going to purchase something like that.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so for my previous question, I use the Wowza encoder, the Clearcaster. And it's a very high-end encoder, but I tell you, ever since I bought it, it does one thing and it does one thing very well. And that's what you want in a production, that you trust your gear and you trust it to do what you want it to do. And I know that the Wowza has done that for me.
The Wowza is a great piece of hardware. For people getting started, the thing that that I use the most, all I got to throw something in to encode, are either the smaller or larger elemental links, so the HD or the UHD links. I've been doing most of the stuff, and we're going to actually be doing Office Hours 2.0 in the UHD, which Andy, by the way, is down there. You have to ask JJ; it's down in the office. The big thing for me is that I do a lot of things that are complex with channels, and so not only am I able to push it into AWS, but I can send 8 channels with the smaller one and 16 channels with the larger one. The UHD will also do 10-bit, which means you can do HDR if you want to. So as far as future proofing, I can't believe that as someone who has spent literally $500,000 to $1 million on encoders, I can't believe what you can get with these little boxes. What they hate when I call them chiclets, but they're chiclets anyway. So they're what's nice about them, you can send them to somebody and just plug your video into that HDMI or SDI, just plug it in, and then I control it on my end. You don't have to do anything other than knowing that it has an internet connection and it has a video connection, and it just does the thing on, and I take control of it through AWS. So I would definitely check out the elemental links. Next question.
Victor Hernandez is up next from Springfield, Missouri, and he says, what's the difference between a Logitech Miro 4K and Brio UHD 4K? On Amazon, there's only a $1 difference.
I don't know if we know what the Miro is. Dag nabbit. It's bigger. I don't. I have not used the Miro, so I don't know. It looks. I mean, it says it does frame rates of up to 90 frames. Do we know if this is this a new webcam that none of us own? Is that the? Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The only thing that I can think of is that Brio used to be a company that Logitech ended up buying, so they might just be two different ways that they went across it, and they just haven't really merged them together or
yeah. When I go to the web,
continued.
When we go to the web page, it looks like they're the same thing. So I don't know if there's any difference there. Next question.
Comes from Miguel Lopez Waterman, and he says, AWS question, I don't have any instances running, yet got an email warning me that 85% of my 30 free gig storage is used. Have I been hacked? What are the steps to find out what's going on?
I think that you need to go to your admin page and find out if any processes are running. It should outline what those processes are that are running potentially and what they're on. So And then you can also see a log of all the processes that have been activated. So you just have to look at whether they're there or not. So that's what I would do is go into your admin page, see if there's any current processes, and also look for the logs, because it'll log every process that's happened in your account. So you'll be able to see from there whether it's stuff you did or someone else. Go ahead. Next question.
Vic Hernandez asking the big question. Alex, is it 090 or 090?
It's such a complicated question because it is actually 090, but we say 090. So 090 is tends to be how we talk about it, but it is zeros in the, anyway, it's complicated. Next question.
John Futz of Sellens Grove, Pennsylvania, up next with, how do you set up a VPN to control an ATEM Mini?
You want to jump in with the process of that. It depends on what kind of VPN you're setting up. So there's VPNs and then there's port forwarding. Now, most of my experience is with hardware VPNs like Meraki's or Ubiquiti. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, generally speaking, you'd want to have a VPN appliance, either a standalone VPN router or your actual gateway acting as your VPN device, VPN server. So within the VPN server, you have to create a radius server, which allows you to generate accounts for different people, so you can have secure login credentials for each person. Once you have that, you need to set those specific clients to go into a specific VLAN within your network. If you don't have any VLANs, you don't really need to think about that, but it would be best practice to do so. And once you have that, you give those credentials to the person who will be remoting in, along with the IP address of the ATEM that they need to access. Then once they're logged in via VPN, they type in the ATEM within the ATEM software control, or using if they have a hardware panel, use the hardware panel and log that into the actual switcher, and you're connected.
Yeah, how we've used them in the past is not just to get to an ATEM, but to get to our entire system. And so in that path, again, the two leaders I think are probably Meraki and Ubiquiti as far as hardware goes to build those things out. Most of my experience is all with Meraki, just because it was easier to administer and faster. But Ubiquiti is much more cost effective than Meraki is. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles is our next questioner. It says, is Speedify on a Raspberry Pi a good solution for critical live streaming, or is something like a Teradek Core a safer bet?
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I would definitely lean into the hardware if possible. My experience with Speedify has been intermittent, so sometimes it's worked well, sometimes it hasn't. But when you go to a hardware bonding or balancing solution, it tends to be a lot more consistent, and there's less points of failure in that one hardware device versus like OS running on a Raspberry Pi. Like all these different things can fail within that chain.
And I would probably lean, if I was going to bond something with the PepWave, as opposed to the Teradek cores. I'd probably go with the PepWave. It's just more dedicated to that process. What were you going to say, Noah?
Yeah, sorry. I also have PepWave HD2. I have 2 of those units. So absolutely.
Yeah, and this is also where something I didn't mention about the elemental links is they have one little feature if you're streaming, is that they use Zixi. And Zixi is considerably more reliable under duress. So SRT works great for video as long as your internet is good. When your internet becomes unstable or is low bandwidth, Zixi tends to handle that situation much more effectively than SRT. And we've done a lot of stress tests, and we found that Zixi stands considerably higher than FEC and marginally higher than SRT as far as reliability. So when you get into those kinds of environments, you want to look for either a Zixi packager or you want to use something like an elemental link. Next question.
James in Dublin, Ireland, up next, and he asks, is there a way to create shortcuts to topics in Discord?
I don't know of any way to do that. Does anyone? I think you might have. Oh, go ahead, Stuart.
Yes, get a Chad.
The chat. All right, next question.
My Douglas Carmichael's up next. He said, how did you bring the SRT feeds in and out of Isadora, and what tool did you use for the final stream output?
This is a Vimalakirti question, I think, for the second hour.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Okay. So let's
yeah.
yeah.
Let me push that back out. I thought I had only those tags coming in.
Good one though. We will tell you. Just stay tuned.
Good question.
Moving
All
on,
right.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana has a regular question here, and he asks, is there any way to have multiple webinars with different base resolutions locked in, 360, 720, even 1080? That way those with different bandwidths get a more customized experience.
Go ahead, Noah.
My understanding is most of the major platforms that push out streams have that incremental base kind of built in, and they aggregate and create their own system with that, and they do that automatically. It always is nice to think about like having the ability and the users to be able to do that, but the average person probably doesn't know those differences and doesn't know what their bandwidth allots for.
I actually don't know if that's true for Zoom when you set it to 1080p and you select send 1080p to all attendees. We've seen the behavior where those attendees just don't get video. So if they don't have enough bandwidth to get 1080p, so if you set your event at HD and then you set it to send 1080p to all participants, because of the low latency nature, it's not being transcoded, and they just don't get it. And so when it goes to 1080p, they lose the video, and we just saw this last weekend. So I was dealing with support calls of people like, I can't see it. Now, when you can see it, it looks amazing. But if you can't, you can't. And it's become rarer for that to happen. But you do need to know that's one of the reasons that I think that there was some trepidations about going to 1080p for everyone is not just a load issue for Zoom. It's that some people can't get it. Next question.
Comes from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. And Liberty says, before the show, Jason and Bill spoke about the sound issues that come from hardwood floors. Apart from adding a rug, what other ways can you reduce the hollow sound in a small room?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, the tools that you have there to take care of that are absorption and diffusion. You'd want to, as much as possible, eliminate any parallel surfaces, like parallel walls. So add some furniture around the room so that you have less surfaces that allow sound waves to just keep on bouncing back and forth. That's the early reflections or the hollow sounds that you're hearing. Think of it for the ceiling and the floor as well. So you might want to add some. If it's not something that's strictly used as a studio, you might want to think of some decorative lighting that may hang up there that can help diffuse the sound waves bouncing around. If you can put a couch there with a lot of soft pillows, that would help. Bookshelves are really good at diffusing as well. So think about how visualize the sound waves and see how and what surfaces make them keep on moving around.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, if you can't do the floor, then do the ceiling. In my case, I use these sonic 2x2s over critical areas in the room, and that helps. And then if you use a wall treatment, that helps break it down. And like Mickey says, you want to cut the reverberation time down so you don't have that problem. And in a pinch, you can put a lot of pets in the room. That one.
Go ahead. Lots of pets. They make other noises, and it's the little claws against the hardwood floor that you pick up on the mic. Go ahead, Bill.
And I was going to, Mickey covered 90% of it. You just want to have absorption in some ways. If you can't do the floor, yes, I agree, do the ceiling. I don't know if I can pull this up, but if I can, you are seeing that I have auto poles with diffusion foam across my ceiling because I can't do anything about my hardwood floors. I could put some sort of carpeting down, but then with all that I move around in my office chair, I would have to do a carpet and then another pad on top of that. And I just didn't want to go through the hassle. So you're trying to keep that bounce back and forth. Like if you injected a ping pong ball really fast and it just kept going back and forth from floor to ceiling, it's that buildup of frequencies that you want to stop somewhere along its path.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and to elaborate a little bit more on what I was doing, I used triangular framed acoustic foam, bass traps in the corner. I like triangles because they're highly modular and they look cooler than rectangles. Hexagons are too hard to build, so I settled on triangles.
Yeah, I have moving blankets around me, like a little cube, and then I'm turned about 20 degrees to the corner to make sure that I'm not talking straight into a wall. And even on that corner, I have more moving blankets. That tends to be, but that's all I use the room for. And I also have carpet. So I add all of those things because I hate reflection. Next question.
Moving on with Jason Baish's next question. I have a client with a large conference room build out. Video matters less than audio, and everyone must hear and be heard. Zoom's large conference hardware offerings seem outdated. Are there any non-audio mixer solutions for miking a bunch of attorneys?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, there are a bunch of solutions that are specifically made for conference rooms. A popular one is Shure's Microflex, and their units not only have microphones in them, but also a lot of them have headphone outputs, so you can keep it a nice, clean, no bleed system. Sennheiser's alternative to that is, I think they call it the ADN system. Though, since you mentioned that it's going to be used by attorneys, what I see in a lot of government institutions are the solutions from Bosch. I think they call it the Centis. And those, if you have to run wireless microphone systems, those come with very robust encryption in them.
You're thinking like gooseneck? Is that?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah,
That's what I was
gooseneck.
thinking too. Yeah.
Jeffrey.
So the big thing that was tripping me up was the non-audio mixer part, because that's just asking for a lot of trouble. If you don't have any type of mixer, you could zone things and then put a group in one area with area mics, but that are going straight into a computer and stuff like that. You'd still need a sound person that can control it, hold the faders and things like that. You could also try, just if you're going through Zoom, giving them, headphones, and then they're talking through their microphones, and then with some sort of echo cancellation on, but that's going to probably cause a lot more problems from there. It's really a tough thing without a mixer. I'd have an X32 and mics lavs hooked up to each person to make the sound as best as possible.
Echo Jen.
Mickey mentioned the Microflex system by Shure, but the Sennheiser system is called Team Connect. It goes up into the ceiling, and it's all AR automatic, so that you don't need a mixer. But it is a really good system for lawyers, especially because they've got a lot of money and they want to hear each other. So the Team Connect might be a good solution, but it is expensive with Sennheiser.
It's a 20-foot ceiling. Jan, is it still going to work?
No, it will not. No, that needs to be like 9 feet. Mickey?
Yeah, just going back to what Jeffrey mentioned, a lot of these conference room systems have a 2 or 3 U unit that has an auto mixer built in. And I believe the Shure one actually has a real what do you call this? Dugan auto mix in it.
Yeah, and I believe that the product that you're looking at is the DIS CCU is the one that I believe is the one that may be the one you're looking for that. Shure makes a lot of really good solutions for this. It just depends on how much that matters. One of the things that I've seen at some corporate ones is that there's part of that Microflex system is got these little beads that you just drop into your pocket, and a lot of lawyers, oddly enough, have pockets. So you can just drop into your pocket, and it sticks out of the top, and everyone just kind of drops into their pocket, and it actually just closes that distance a little bit. So it makes it's a little bit nicer than leaning into a gooseneck. You can also, they have area ones, they have ceiling ones, they have all of those things, and I think that Shure has really done a lot. But the thing that will make the biggest difference in amplifying whatever you do with those mics is how you treat the room. So you can't get we saw a company I worked with that probably spent, I don't know, $30,000 on their microphones, and they put it into an all glass conference room. That's all I want to say. All right, it just it's completely defeated everything. So soft walls, like thinking about how to have soft walls, and if they really care about it, you just have to keep on coming back. Like, how much do they actually care about the solution? Because the room treatment is going to make as much or more of a difference than the mics. Next question.
Richard Lavery in Belfast here on the panel says, has anyone used the APC-R controller for wireless camera control from the ATEM, and what do you think of it, if so?
Richard, can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I only saw it recently this weekend because I'm trying to find a solution for it. But it's from Middle Things, and it's a controller that allows you to control both kind of DJI kind of stuff, but also allows you to over Bluetooth connect to 4K or 6K or an Ursa, and allows you ATEM full camera control.
Yeah, I have to say we're gonna have to bring middle things onto the show because they keep showing up like in our discussions and after hours. And there's like, when you see it, there's like there's a groundswell somewhere within our group of people talking about middle things. And then other people I'm talking to are finding that solution. So we'll work on figuring out a way to get them on the show. So someone put it in the second hour, so I remember, but I've been thinking about that a little bit already. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. When a university restored full capacity events, they gave students the opportunity to sit on the sound check for the first stadium concert on campus as an activity. My first thought was Belfast it instead. Would it be as memorable or impactful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're going to keep moving towards having more and more remote people running shows. I just did it over the weekend where had a TD, my main TD, Nate, was at home or at his office in Utah, and Matt and Brian Maddox was in Savannah, Georgia, running the audio. And so we still have people on site that you haven't eliminated that. What's interesting about it is that I want to keep on outlining is that it's not meaning that we're using less people per show. It's just where they are. Like we're actually using sometimes more people, but it's allowing us to have those people be anywhere in the world as opposed to what we could find in that given location. So that's the really thing that's really interesting. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up again with Andy mentioned that ATEM OSC can be deprecated in favor of MixEffect. I'm running an Intel Mac. Would you still recommend ATEM OSC?
Go ahead, Andy.
I stand by my recommendation, and here is why. So, in the case of, I guess, yes, in the case of what I believe is the Belfast method. So you've got the the BMD hardware over here, and then you've got a bunch of points to different users, and they're all sitting inside of a VPN, right? And they're all direct connecting to Blackmagic. So that's going to cause a problem when you're trying to. If you're on Intel, you're not going to have the option, right, of running MixEffect unless you buy an iPad or something like that. But my recommendation would be to put an iPad inside of Belfast and then have everybody run an OSC interface connecting to MixEffect, telling MixEffect what to send to the hardware. There's only one point connecting into the Blackmagic hardware, but everybody else doesn't matter what system you're on. If you can run Isadora or Universe or any interface like that or Touch OSC, you can connect to there, and you can use this with a VPN, or you can use this unicast with Streamweaver, whatever you want to do. It doesn't necessarily matter. But that, I think, is sort of more of the Office Hours 2.0 thinking, where the hardware and software is sitting on one side, and you are remote sessioning into that, and that allows multiple connections that do different things and specialize it. So that would be the reason I'd stand by my suggestion.
Next question.
Nathan GS in Singapore says, how can any Zoom or Teams session normalize audio levels to somewhat like what Office Hours does?
Well, you put scopes in the window, and then you have everybody. I know that'd be funny in a business conference for everyone to normalize their audio. It's hard. They will do it if you leave your original audio off. It will do the best it can to pull everybody together, but that's about the best you're going to get without the auto gain that it provides. Is probably the closest you're going to get without doing what we do, which is tuning it all up every morning. Next question. Oh, go ahead, Mickey. Before we jump.
Yeah, just to add to that, the automatically adjust microphone level checkbox only works if the interface or the audio input you're using is software controllable. If it's something like a MixPre where there's no software control in terms of level, it can't control your MixPre.
Right. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, up again with OSBot, OBS BOT, OBSBot, was recently announced having a true gimbaled 4K USB remote controllable cam. Looks too good to be true for client kits. Any thoughts on this?
Go ahead, Alan.
And you're right, it is called OBSBot. No, I was calling it OBSBot for a while. I'm sort of the opinion. I've seen the Tiny Bot, which is their first iteration of it, and it's okay as a webcam. None of the technology is particularly new. There's tracking has been around for a while now. The gesture control currently doesn't really work. It was not very consistent, but the actual tracking around the room is fairly consistent, but so is it on things like the Facebook cams and everything. I'm waiting to see because I'm actually quite interested in this one, but it's a Kickstarter at the minute and I'm not going to put any money down, or Indiegogo, so I'm not going to put any money down until it's actually out and being used by somebody not being paid to sponsor it.
Yeah.
Which a lot of the videos are.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I do have the OddSpot, and what I really like about it that would make great, because I was thinking of this for that home kit, is the ability to, that if you touch it, it will actually position where you are. So somebody could actually physically move it to where they need it to be. And then there is software, so you could actually hook it up to a PC or a Mac and control the software. You can also turn off the gestures, because the one main gesture is the hand raise. And anybody that does any type of hands-free things knows that this is the one thing that's going to make that camera just go completely wild. It'll just start turning on and turning off. So the gestures, I normally turn those off. As for the 4K sensor, it'll be interesting to see how they handle that 4K sensor. The one problem I have with this is if I move towards the corner, it'll always mess up the brightness. It'll try and fix it, even though you have it set to not adjust.
How's the image quality overall?
Well, I have this one. Let me.
I noticed that you're not using it as your main
up.
camera, so I suspect that it's not as good as we'd like.
This is my this when I do product reviews and stuff like that. This is looking at the table, and I can set it up so I can turn it to me, but I'd have to stand it. It does a decent job.
So we're looking through it right now.
You're looking through it right now. You have to do a ton of fidgeting to make it look just like that.
Can you
just
cut back
like
to it
with
again?
any other webcam? Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a little soft.
So there it is, right there. Yeah, it's yeah, and once again, it's a webcam. It is 1080p. And it does have a digital zoom that is on a 1.5, if I remember correct, to zoom in on the table.
Okay. Go ahead. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael has it, and he says, currently my system is based around Waves SoundGrid as the audio networking protocol. If I were building a virtual production studio to work with commercial clients, should I be using Dante technology instead?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, sure. You can get a lot of, you can put on full shows using SoundGrid, but just the sheer mass of hardware and solutions that have Dante capability in it allows you to be really flexible and powerful in terms of your workflow.
Next question.
Tlaloc Miguel Lopez Waterman is up next again with, have any of the panelists been talent or panelists on productions using Video Ninja? My experience of the back end has been excellent. What is the front end experience like? Not a technical question as much as a content and human experience one, he says.
I know that we've used it actually for bringing our telestrator, or not telestrator, but our teleprompter operator. They send us a Ninja connection, and then we jump into it, and it's worked great. So that's been my experience. But all we're doing is sending text. But from a user experience, it's been easy. We just jump in, we hit go, and we get what we expect. So that has been great for us. But I don't know, and it's been the reason we use it oftentimes instead of Zoom is because Zoom has a tendency to, the compression inside of Zoom has the tendency to have the text jump. Because it holds onto the frames and then jumps forward, and it doesn't give us a smooth frame, and the Ninja does a better job at that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with, in the studio, could you use an M1 Mac as a dedicated MixEffects machine for OSC control of an ATEM with lower latency than Wi-Fi from an iDevice?
I think so. Absolutely. I mean, it runs MixEffects, so we know that it can be done with an M1 Mac. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again, for a 24-hour always-on installation like Office Hours 2.0, would a virtualizable OSC to ATEM engine from MixEffects be useful as a separate product?
Maybe. No, I don't know if we would need. I think we would call that probably Isadora. Go ahead, Andy.
I would say MixEffects has it. MixEffects is giving you all of the controls now versus just the SuperSources controls. So for me, you have it. It's called MixEffects. You can run it on an M1 if you need to. You can run it on an iPad. I think it's there now. Is there maybe a case to ask for it to be a desktop application? Maybe, but with the prevalence of M1 and the ability to run those, I don't know that you would need it to be a separate application.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. When Brian is mixing audio remotely, what control surface does he use and how does he connect to the mix engine on site?
I believe he's using the remotely, was it remotely possible?
Remotely possible, yeah.
Yeah. So his board is actually tied into our board. We have two Yamaha boards, and he's using a QL5 and we have a QL1. But he's able to tie those together. So he's just running his board remotely, and it works, knock on wood, all the time. Next question.
James Brooks has our last regular question this morning. Any thoughts on last night's Tony Awards presentation production?
I don't know if anybody had. I didn't see it, so I can't say that I have any strong opinion about it. I'm not a big awards person though. All right, okay, we are we ran right up to the top of the hour, and now we're going to change direction, change our subject to talking about breaking down a show. Now we've had Andy and Jonathan on before, and so you from Liminal, and we're going to they're going to break down. I've been asking Andy if he could show us some of the stuff he's been doing in the background and some of the stuff that Liminal, both he and Jonathan have worked on, and finally we got him on. so I'm going to let Andy take it away and just start to explain it. If you have questions, listen to what Andy's saying, listen to what Jonathan's saying, and if you have questions, make sure to throw them into Makana, and we'll get through as many as we can. All right, Andy, can you give us a little bit of a breakdown?
Absolutely. So we'll spend maybe about 10 minutes talking about the show so people get a framework for what it is and the challenges we had to face. And we'll do this in sort of a teardown style for the Monday teardown session. So thanks again for having us, Alex. So the production we're going to be talking about is production of the Vimalakirti Sutra, or also called This Body is So Impermanent. And this was something that we worked on in collaboration with the Fisher Center. It was directed by Peter Sellars and edited by Tim Squyres. And it was a project that had a bunch of different vectors going on with it. We had remote talent. So we had a musician, a choreographer, and a calligrapher located in different locations around the world. And they needed to collaborate in real time and work off of each other as they were putting this together. So that was between Oregon, Amsterdam, and the Hangzhou region of China. We had a director, Peter Sellars, as I said, in Los Angeles. And then Liminal, so myself and Jonathan, are in the DC area. We had two locations just south of DC, and that we were doing the video engineering and the compositing for the production. And I'll explain more about what the compositing was in a moment. Just to give some high-level details, this was a piece that rehearsed for 6 months. It rehearsed from 1 in the morning to 5:30 in the morning, 3 days a week, every other week for 6 months. So I was a very tired person during this period of time, and that was because we based it off of the time in China. So it was more convenient for the crew that was out there.
I just want to underline that as you go through it is 6 months of rehearsal. You know, because a lot of people think that these kind of events, oh, they just threw them together. We'll have people come in for a day or have them come in for a week, and not realizing that to do something really amazing may take just a little more time than you expect.
And what was so interesting about that was that this was a combination of a filmic and a theatrical process together. A 6-month rehearsal schedule, I mean, I guess 3 months would be a little more standard in theater, but nonetheless, especially for devised pieces, it would certainly be like a 6-month period. Taking that and then applying it to production as a model was a really empowering moment, because not only did we have to rehearse the technology for this piece, but the artists themselves had to sort of jam and figure out their rhythm and how they collaborate as performers in this project, because everything is based on everybody else. And I'll explain a little bit more about what those limits are and what we had to face there. But the other big point about this was we had these abstract visuals and designs. It was a combination of all these video feeds. So you would have maybe Michael as the bass layer sitting in bed, and you would have Ganavya, the musician, sort of faded on top of him, and then the calligraphy feed would be mixed on top of that. And all of that had to be mixed in real time, and we were figuring out exactly what that combination looked like, so we knew how to build each of the studios when it became time to actually film the project, which we did in the first week of December. So it was this combination approach of thinking of those constituent elements. Here's how we did it. So I'll spend just a quick moment on this slide. I'll use this slide probably to help answer questions in the future. I don't want to spend too much time here. I want to get to the questions right away. But again, the locations were Amsterdam, Oregon, and China. And for video, we used Zoom as our main contribution system. Everybody hopped into a Zoom meeting. We could see everybody with low latency, and I'll show you some screenshots from that Zoom meeting as well in a moment. I also sent SRT stems back to my location here. So we used SRT mini server, which allowed me to have all the remote OBS instances sending their video back to us. So you're running OBS, You have OBS virtual camera going into Zoom, and you have SRT from OBS coming into SRT mini server, which put NDI into my network. I brought the NDI into Isadora to do my mixing and then bounced that back into Zoom. So a live previs of what the final project would look like was available to the director who I was on a phone call with. Now for audio, we used audio movers. So I had a multi-channel audio system going on at the location inside of Oregon. So that was provided at relatively low latency through audio movers, and we were able to hear each other. We were able to hear the performance there. Jonathan, do you want to talk a little bit about what you were doing on your end with the quality control and all of that?
Yeah, I can hop in on that. As you can see from this diagram here, both Andy and I had networked our systems together, our home offices, using Bird Dog Cloud. And that was a fantastic way to make sure that once the video entered our system as SRT, got converted to NDI, it was then able to be easily accessed from either one of us seamlessly. And on my end, what I had set up is I was able to use an Atomos monitor to look through some color scopes and some various settings there. I was monitoring all the cameras remotely to make sure we had quality feeds, especially since for several of these performers, they didn't have a videographer on site. This was during the height of the pandemic, and so we had to send them kits and operate those remotely. So I was monitoring those cameras. I also had to provide some color transformation for the log footage we were getting from China, so that I can then put that back into the Zoom meeting with the proper transforms and crops applied. So that was sort of the quality that I was doing on my side, all networked to Andy, so that we can talk, communicate, and share those video across us.
The other thing that was really fun about this was, again, for those of you who watch the trailers and selected clips, you'll note that Wang Dongling is writing an ancient Chinese manuscript, and or I think it's a Buddhist text, but he's writing that out, and none of us know how to read that. But we had somebody from Ink Productions on the team who was looking at that feed in Zoom and then putting up these cards of the translated to English text of what was being written in real time into the Zoom meeting. So we kind of use that as our clock. So as the calligraphy is happening, we know what part of the text we're in, and the musicians sync up to that, and the choreographers sync up to that, and my mixing and the director's understanding of where we are in the piece is all based on that live translation that we were doing through Zoom of the calligraphy. Jonathan, do you want to talk about the setups for each of the users?
For sure. So as I mentioned before, these performers, many of them did not have videographers on site. Michael was one of those examples. So this was him in his apartment in Amsterdam. We sent him a bunch of equipment. There's a little example of what he was using. This was a tray with a laptop on it, a camera mounted, as well as capture cards, power banks. There's a few things not shown here. He had a tethered Ethernet cable, so we had reliable internet. And this was because the entire duration of this performance piece, this was not shot scene by scene. This was shot as a 60-minute performance that was then the footage was then mixed and edited afterwards. But it was shot start to finish over multiple takes over multiple weeks for the final shooting. And as part of that, Michael had to lift the camera and walk with it facing him, and then place it down and then do some performances. So this was designed to facilitate that. And again, he had to be sort of operating this remotely. Then moving on to the next setup. So this is Ganavya. She was in Oregon, and she was the singer, the musician. She had a relatively simple setup, just a straight camera on her perspective, and then some B-roll in addition. What was special about her setup, though, is that we had some audio engineers who did some very advanced recording. This was sort of like a wooden chapel environment with some very good acoustic properties, and so they were able to do multi-channel recording, very high fidelity, and a lot of that was able to be actually streamed through audio movers, which can really handle that. I think it was 48 kilohertz audio, 32-bit. And then the next setup, this was from China. So there was a cinematographer and a camera team working in China. Of these images you see on the left, the column on the leftmost, those were images we actually got live. So those are those two cameras that were able to get the close-ups, as well as an overhead. It was a motorized head on a camera jib. So that's what was coming in live. And then on the right, there's some B-roll that was gathered on a separate day. So these are the three different performers and the different setups that we had. But what was interesting, and what Andy will talk about, is how these all came together, because the purpose of this film was to sort of combine everything in an abstract way, and to be able to mix between these different layers and overlap them on top of each other. And this required a lot more precision than you would expect.
So what you're looking at on screen here are renders that were coming in real time from Isadora mixing this performance together. So these were conversations that I was having with the director in real time as the performance was going on. Again, this was a rehearsal where we did the full thing start to finish for 6 months. So we were compositing this on the fly, And that was a critical part to understanding how this would be done, because we didn't have like a shot list that we were going off of here. We figured this out together in real time. So the way that I did it was I took those NDI feeds into Isadora and I began just blending them. And we looked at different blend modes that we liked. We looked at how we wanted to change those blends over time, whether we wanted to Luma key the text that was being written, whether we wanted to get the texture of the paper in there in different scenes, and then keyframing all of that over the course of the performance. For me, the tool that I used really more than anything was Jonathan's Korg Nano Control, which I still have and I have to give back to you. But I've had it for quite a while now. And what I did with it was I took the dials and knobs and faders and I tied those to all the different mixing things. So I was sitting there adjusting the faders up and down to control each performer's presence in the composited output. I was using the dial to control their exposure, and I was using the buttons to move between different scenes in Isadora based on where we were in the piece. And so these, what you're looking at here is a collection of some of the live renderings that we were getting. Those were going back into the Zoom meeting without a second of delay that the director was looking at there. And then Jonathan was monitoring the feeds. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so monitoring was very interesting with this. As Andy showed in the diagram before, we use Zoom as the primary monitoring method, and this is something I'm excited to talk about and answer questions about, because it is awesome that we can have all these video feeds just tossed into Zoom, and that collects everything and allows all the production staff, the directors, even the performers to selectively choose and multi-pin what they want to see. You can see in the top corner there, that's a sort of diagram of that's a snippet of what the Zoom call looked like. And you had the 4 cameras as feeds coming in. You had the director, stage managers, producers, backstage footage so we can communicate with the crew, as well as that translation slide that Andy talked about. That's a real-time translation from the calligraphy that's being painted. And then some shots of my setup down below, and Andy had a similar setup, being able to monitor all these feeds and being able to sort of make decisions on the fly. And again, this was recorded start to finish, and so we would record it and would talk and have decisions and conversations on that as it was going, but also afterwards, and then do it again.
And one of the things I'll say about this too is that we recorded all the ISO feeds every time, and then we would have asynchronous sessions with the director where we would throw them into Premiere and start looking at, okay, this is what we did live in previs. Let's look at that. Let's compare that to what we can do inside of a proper, creative environment. And that, again, we were sort of trying to traffic the know is something that I learned a lot when I was an undergrad. Talking about trafficking what we understand and how that is shared among artists there was a really important part of that process. I want to show you a little segment, maybe just a minute or so of this, and I'll talk over it. I'll bring the audio out, but just what this actually could look like inside of the performance itself. So up top, you're seeing sort of a cropped version of the gallery view where you can see all the important feeds. So you can see on the left the top left is my composite view. The camera next to that is the dolly camera that Uliqui was operating. That's following the calligraphy. You have the director. To the right of that, you can see a behind the scenes camera. You can see Uliqui actually operating the ARRI on that dolly there. Then down in the bottom left, you can see Ganavya. You can see Michael next to that, and then you can see the B camera, which was following Wang Dongling, and then you can see the translations. And then the bottom is a segment from the final film, where you can actually see the what it actually ended up looking like once all of it was together. So you can see my previs and compare that to what it actually ended up being. And I try to sync it up so that you could see the ingredients of it at the same time as what happened into the final film. So you can see that there's this whole crossfading and texture and effect moment of this, and there's a push and a pull throughout the piece. It's a conversation among the performers who are themselves isolated. So it has this, I could go on for hours about the aesthetic implications of a piece like this, but the idea was that it wasn't like we just had to find the look that looked right and just leave it there. As the piece was evolving and they were performing, the way that we brought them together was very much of the director's input. So this segment is sort of supposed to illustrate the behind the scenes as well as the final product synced up, so you can see how it all came together. But I think that's
I think one of the interesting things there when you talk to that is the fact that you're rehearsing it over and over and over again. When we do film, we have one version of it that usually is a setup for that day. Like that is the way it's going to. we pre-vised it, we planned it. We might experiment a little bit inside of that, but we don't change it. We shoot it and then we're gone. And the idea that you could spend 6 months kind of evolving the look is really, really interesting.
And then one final fun fact. The day we finished shooting this was the first day that I came on office hours. And in the bottom left, there's Jonathan asleep in the bed because we were up all night. So just a fun factoid about that. But it was kind of funny where that all came together at you guys were meeting us at sort of the end of this process. So, and this was one of the projects that I was talking to Jonathan about this earlier, but this was one of the things that inspired us to productize a lot of the things that we were doing in this performance, like Streamweaver and ZoomOSC, because we realized that the implications of this could be a lot larger than we had anticipated. So that's when we started retooling for ZoomOSC 4 and stuff like that. So that's kind of the whole through line of all of that.
Oops, you're muted, Alex.
How was Streamweaver? You built it inside of this show, or what?
Streamweaver was something that we were sort of figuring out what it needed to be while we were doing this performance. Originally, it had the capability of decoding SRT feeds into NDI, and I think we had even done some tests using that. We decided to go with SRT mini server for this performance because it just made more sense for what we needed to do.
Right.
It also gave us a sense of like where were the pain points in this process, because it wasn't a perfect process. I'm not here to represent it as such. There were points where I wish, if I could just adjust this setting on the far end, if I could adjust this camera control, if I could adjust this, I was starting to understand what the needs were in the production of things that would be on the far end. And again, this wasn't the kind of thing that we could just, toss up a VPN together. I couldn't walk somebody through, all of the steps in that chain, but we could, as I started to understand this more, it gave me a sense of, we had already released Streamweaver, midway through this process, but it helped me understand how we wanted to use it. Like, okay, we want to be able to adjust these lights. We want to be able to adjust these parameters of this piece of software. It was giving us a better sense of those types of things.
Now with the tray camera, which I thought was really great. So the tray is set up so he can just pick it up and just set it down wherever he wants to, right? That's kind of the goal there.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and so did you have any control over the camera itself? Were you talking to it?
Yeah, admittedly didn't have much. We were able to use, these were Sony cameras, and we were able to use some of the computer access tools, but we weren't having a ton of success with that, honestly. And that's something that, Andy spoke about how this sort of inspired our exploration in Streamweaver, especially from a camera control side of things. This was frankly, if I had known about Blackmagic and some better usage of their remote tools to control, I probably would have gone with that instead of this. I think one of the main decisions to go with the Sony camera was because we knew that we weren't going to be able to change every setting and adjust it in real time. And we wanted a camera that the actor could learn quickly. And to his credit, Michael did. The Sony cameras and those mirrorless are so easy to set them on some auto settings and adjust some basic parameters and to get good images out of them. So we were able to sort of rely on that. But
we also needed we need a good low light performance as well, or
Right.
dynamic light performance, because this is happening. So it's afternoon in Hangzhou, China. It's the sunrise in Amsterdam, and it's the middle of the night in Oregon. And the sun is literally rising during this performance. So the lighting is changing dramatically, and we needed a camera that we felt had good auto settings out of the gate to be able to adjust that, because we didn't have far end control of the exposure and things like that. Or we didn't want to compromise the clip because we had no idea at what point that clip was going to be in program in the final cut. So we were worried about adjusting it in real time.
And which camera? Which is it? A7? Was it one of the A7 series or?
I believe it was. We used two different
It
units.
was, yeah. I believe the A7S or the A7S3 and maybe the A7S2 sourcing and availability was a little difficult in Amsterdam.
Yeah, it was really, really, that was the other thing. It was like getting hardware during this period of time was just so difficult. I mean, it was really, this was like November, December of 2020. And being able to source the right cameras and equipment and lighting even it was really difficult to do that.
Absolutely. I think we have some questions coming in. Let's go ahead and jump to them.
We do. The first one starts with Douglas Carmichael, and he says, let me click the answer button. There we go. How did you bring the SRT feeds in and out of Isadora, and what tool did you use for the final stream output?
Okay, so to get the SRT stems into Isadora, we went through SRT mini server. SRT mini server allows you to tag each of your SRT feeds and then export them as individual NDI. We then used the NDI watcher in Isadora, which brought the NDI feeds in individually. I did my composite, again, controlling that through the Korg Nano control. Then my stage output went out to NDI, went into NDI virtual camera and into Zoom for playback. It went out to a recorder for recording purposes, obviously. And then it would go through Bird.Cloud for Jonathan to be able to monitor on his end. So NDI in, NDI out of Isadora, SRT in through mini server, and then SRT as the back end of Bird.Cloud. So it was kind of a constellation of those elements.
And I think it's worth adding to all of this that, again, repeating that the purpose of this was to devise the piece. And this was something that all the footage was recorded locally and sent in high quality and in good old fashioned hard drives from China. And, again, this project didn't necessarily need to have been filmed this way. There could have been, film in Amsterdam first and then send the film crew to Oregon and then send it to China. But because this piece was so heavily based on this sort of artistic combination of the performers being able to react to each other, being able to improvise the calligraphy and have that then transform to the dialogue and then have the performance of the motion timed to that. Admittedly, this is much more in the realm of theater than it is in the realm of film. And because of that, the live element was necessary to devising this piece.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was huge to figuring it out. I think the other thing I'd say on that is if it wasn't clear from the clips that we shared, if you haven't had a chance to review them, Michael's movement is based on the shape of the text. Ganavya's intonation is based on the sort of the gusto at what the calligraphy is done and how Michael is performing to it. So the performance itself is not just being aware for like a time synchronization, but the actual spirit of the performance is entirely based on this sort of throw everything into a pot and see what comes out. And then the director and I are looking at those stems and trying to figure out how we want to represent this collaboration visually. So it's not the kind of thing that we could predetermine or plan out that way. It's a different.
And I think that's one of the things that people like about live performance and theater in general is this idea that it's a play. It's not. It's a play off of everything that's happening, including potentially the audience, but definitely all the other pieces that are rolling. Where in film, you're kind of getting the thing that you need, out of each piece. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, did you run into any latency issues with the transatlantic contribution feed?
So this was one of the benefits of, we had two things going on here. We had Zoom, right, with its low latency solution. We didn't push 1080 zooms for this. We just did, I think 720, because it was all that was really needed for seeing the texture of the calligraphy so that we could get the translation back. So we didn't bother with that. Now the latency was inserted intentionally into the SRT. So we ran with 1,000 millisecond buffers for all the feeds. That made sure that whatever happened on its transatlantic trip was going to be covered. We'd be able to get it round trip, and we tested it a whole bunch and made sure that the feeds were good. Every now and then we'd have a little bit of SRT stuttering, but again, we were recording locally, so it didn't affect the final project. It only affected my previs for a moment here and there. I think at one point we also used a proxy server in Amsterdam. So the video feeds would bounce from Hangzhou, China to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Amsterdam, and then Oregon to Amsterdam, which then all came back to Washington, D.C., because it was an easier connection, I guess, transatlantic there for everybody as an aggregate. And that kept things closer in terms of their relative sync. So the proxy server is a feature of SRT mini server that we set to an Amsterdam server location. That worked out well for us.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, what solution did you use for communications? Was it Unity Intercom or something else?
This is a great question because the director had limited options in terms of communication. It was a phone call. So I got a call on my cell phone, put it on speakerphone, put my hands on the nano control, and just had a conversation with him that way. It was sort of what he knew how to do and what he was comfortable with. Now, the rest of the crew communicated. We didn't pump audio into the Zoom call, so that was available if we needed to jump in and say something. The audio was coming through Audio Movers, which was in a browser separate from the Zoom meeting. So there was that capacity to have a conversation without interrupting the performers inside of the Zoom call, but we decided just to do the phone because it was a little easier for him to understand.
Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, what made you choose OBS when Mimo Live is better optimized for Mac OS?
A couple of things here. Not everybody was on a Mac, so we wanted everybody to do the same thing so we could give them the same instructions and have the same issues and challenges and debugging steps. So Mimo Live wouldn't have been an option there. I will say I did not like running OBS on Mac OS. I did not like that at all. The number of reboots and restarts and all of that was not pleasant. But to this day, with the exception of Mimo Live now starting to have more native support for SRT, there was not a great option for getting SRT out of a Mac. And this is what I had. And this is what was going to be cross-platform. So I think, even to this date, as soon as you start looking at Rivet and doing stuff in like browser and all of that, I don't know exactly what all the implications of that are, but it was not a trivial thing to SRT encode in a cross-platform way a year ago. So
I think adding on that real quickly, this was more than a year ago, and in hindsight, if we were to do this again, I think we very much likely would use Zoom as the sole contribution platform.
Yeah, now that we have the ability to get the ISO feeds out of it, right?
Right.
Which again,
The
you
ISO feeds pushing
can see the
1080.
lineage of what we were thinking about here, right?
Well, that's oftentimes some of the best tech is when someone who can code is trying to scratch their own their own itch. Like there's some problem there that they're trying to solve, and so we can see there's an authenticity to the development because you know what you need, out of that, and then the key is, do other people need it? And I think that they do. Next question.
Comes from Tlaloc, and he asks, talk a little about design meetings. They must have been exciting and terrifying looking ahead at a project of this scope.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the artistic side of these design meetings. I think Jonathan, though, will have some fun stories about the more production side of the meetings. But from a design perspective, it was, again, trafficking the know. It was trying to understand what was this going to look like? Because again, we didn't have a final picture. We didn't have a shot list. We didn't have any of that. So we were sitting with sort of a blank slate. And it was one of those things where the artists were discovering it at the same time as production was figuring it out. So it was a continuum kind of conversation. I think that for me, the biggest accelerant in all of that was realizing that a lot of it had to be done live. And that's where the Nano Control really saved me. Just being able to say, all right, I'm going to make an Isadora file where I just tie everything to buttons and faders. And then whatever the director says, I'm ready to be able to do. Eventually, we started to come in on an aesthetic, and we started to get the beats of the performance. We understood that Michael was going to be in the bed for a little while. Then he was going to do this big move where he's going to look into the camera. It's in the selected clips if you've seen them. He picks up the laptop and he moves into another location and dances down a hallway. We understood what the main beats of Ganavya were going to be. We understood how the calligraphy was going to mix in the second angle. I think the biggest aesthetic changes that we had over the course of the piece were where were the performers going to be in their rooms or in their spaces, and how many angles did we need of that in order to be able to cover it. And we sort of settled on one for Amsterdam, one for Oregon, and two for China. And so those were the kind of things that we were discovering as we were going along. But there were a lot of fun production stories. Jonathan, you want to spend a quick minute on
and I think another big discovery over the course of this was the need for B-roll. So initially the director was planning for this to be mostly just the elements recorded live and then mixed afterwards in compositing. But the cinematographer especially pushed for the opportunity to get some B-roll shots and mix those in. And the more B-roll we had, the more that became necessary and really drove the story. And I think part of that ties to this idea that the way this project was devised was over the course of many months, where it wasn't just rehearsing scenes, it was rehearsing the whole thing start to finish. And the director would be able to watch that, and because of Andy's previs, was able to see it very close to what the final result would look like. And every time would be able to make the smallest of changes of, okay, I want to see more of Ganavya at this time and less of Michael. I want them to be cropped in a certain way, positioned in a certain way. And as a result, it became clear of the moments where the pacing needed B-roll, needed some extra element. And that's something that, what's fascinating is that that's more of the narrative relationship between a film editor and a director than sort of live on set. And we were able to imitate that ahead of time, which significantly accelerated the process. Because remember, all this footage was then given to Tim Squyres to do the editing, the post-processing, and go from there. And it was basically a repeat of the process that Andy did with a huge head start, already having dozens and dozens of recordings of the whole show from this pre-visualization standpoint.
And so you recorded everything all the time, so that the raw local records for at some point every performance.
That was a big drive. It was a big drive. 6 months of that, it was a big drive. We had everything.
Was he looking at it and trying to start building the edit while you were still doing rehearsals, or was it pretty much he started it when you finished?
So I think Peter held a lot of the vision for the final look in his head, and what was happening was the rehearsals were rehearsals for Peter just as much as it was for the performers. He was starting to he was rehearsing the edit, which was kind of a crazy thing, but he was rehearsing how he wanted this to combine together over the 6 months, so that when we transferred all the stems over and all the previous material over to Tim, Peter and Tim had a very fast collaboration. They turned this around for Sundance, so they started working on it in December, and we turned over all the ProRes to them from the cameras when they came in. And they had this thing out by Sundance. Yeah. It was a very, very fast edit because they had already figured out the majority of what the main beats of the performance were going to be.
Next question.
Sky Gleason, Seattle, Washington, here in the panel. Which drove the creative choices, finding the art or reaching an audience? Was this content created for the art or for the audience?
I think I need to answer that by talking a little bit about the distribution for this piece. This currently plays in long-term care centers, recovery centers, and hospitals in the greater LA area. So the purpose of this piece, the Vimalakirti Sutra is is a healing text, and my understanding of it is it's a first century Buddhist manuscript about healing and recovery. And there's a tradition that by transcribing the Vimalakirti Sutra, it's an act of healing, or by experiencing it, it's an act of healing. Michael's performance was very much contextualized by COVID-19, and the way that he was physically acting in the bed, and the way that he was sort of trying to embody sickness and illness. And Ganavya was taking on a very much an active sort of combatant to the illness, and was sort of symbolizing a lot of like the fighting, the work that healthcare professionals and all that are doing in this moment. So the art was created for this audience, I think. It was understanding the need for healing, and that impacted the way that the artists brought their performance to the table. And then we tried to figure out how we emphasized each of these isolated performances together to tell a complete story. But the audience was definitely front of mind when we were thinking about how this would be done. In fact, there was even a time where the distribution for this was going to be, you would get the raw stems plus our suggested composite, and then in browser you would recompose. I don't know how far they went on that. They're still working on the website for it, but there was this idea that you could even be participatory in the way that the recording would come together.
Next question.
Thank you.
Tlaloc is back again with, how did you have a director of IT, or did you both do that role? And were you billed as designers, or what?
So Jonathan and I have a 10-year collaboration where pretty much anything that any of us does, the other one also is somehow involved in. So there's that. But our official billing for this is the Global Video Engineering team. And Liminal was contracted as that. We definitely had an impact in the design for sure. I think though that it was the design thinking versus the actual design product. Again, Tim Squyres, who was the editor for Life of Pi and Hulk 2003, very, very different pieces there, a lot of range. He was the one who actually put together the final film. My hope is that our contributions to this were influential in how that was done, and how Peter understood the piece. But yeah, our IT focused billing was the Global Video Engineering.
Next question.
Tlaloc is back again, this time with, how has Streamweaver changed since then?
I think the app itself has actually undergone very minor revisions, but the usage of the app and our understanding of what it's important for has changed a lot, and our ambitions for it as well. So originally we were going to make a Streamweaver Pro that was going to basically have the ability to turn the SRT into NDI and the NDI back into SRT and do all of that. This bidirectional bridge that was going to be cross-platform, and we had this FFmpeg core that was cross-platform. We spent all this time building all that out, and then eventually I kind of just looked at it and I said, you know what? I think Zoom is going to be the better solution for this. Let's put our efforts into making Zoom a good cross-platform contribution system and getting out into NDI and all of that. And that's how we sort of landed on ZoomISO, which I know is still Mac exclusive, but we're considering what we can do to try to get that working cross-platform as well. But our usage of Streamweaver changed dramatically because we understood what kind of hardware we wanted to be able to control that we currently didn't do. And we tried to figure out how we could get Streamweaver to do it.
I find it interesting. I think this is the first time. I mean, a lot of us theoretically understood that SRT could just handle data, but I just didn't know anybody doing it. Same with RTMP. Yeah. Both of them are, the low, this kind of, we can just securely pass data. So I think that it made a lot of sense just to focus on the thing that makes it different. Next question.
Next question from Mickey Macacor here in the panel from the Philippines. How did you deal with sync between all the raw material in post-production? Did you base it off of the previs recordings, or was GPS timecode involved?
So the sync was an interesting question. We thought about using GPS timecode or finding some way to precisely sync it. In the end, we decided not to. And a large part of this was that we were going to be, in post, of course, completely putting this together. And because there was a reactive element between the three performers, and because there was some minimal latency between them, even just the 100 milliseconds or so of Zoom, it was enough that there really wasn't any ground truth. There really wasn't any beats that had to line up exactly, and especially audio. We had sort of audio from one source, and we had the video from all three. And so we decided not to seek a close synchronization option. We did record the sort of multi-view and the views at a zoom so that we had a reference if we needed to look at what was the timing that the actors were presented with. But we actually sort of did not think too much about that, other than making sure that the cameras, the two cameras from China were time coded, so those were locked down. But globally, we did not pay attention to that.
And I think that was also an intentional decision on Peter's end, where he he wanted the liberty to be able to determine the relationship, the temporal relationship between the feeds as part of the edit. And he didn't want to feel like he was locked in on what had actually occurred in real time and space. So I think we had started to raise red flags like, hey, this is going to be a real pain to sync up. And it was, but that was part of the process as well. Like it was intentionally trying to figure out which take to use here, which, and how did that take relate to what was happening in the video at that time. And remember, a lot of these performance pieces are improvisational, and it's not like they have very sharp, like this is not a piece that has a lot of sharp beats to it. It's, you'll see the text come up on screen, and you'll figure out how to transition from the move you're currently doing to a different move. And because it's all spaced out and temporal like that, it was something that we wanted the ability to slide around. So,
next question.
Chuck Wojak in Concord, California. What problems did you not anticipate that you had to solve during the process?
Good question. What was cool about this was that because the process evolved over 6 months, we had an opportunity to address things as they were coming up. Now this did culminate in a shoot for 2 weeks, where we actually did everything that we did everything we had been doing for 6 months, and did it again with a lot of intention for 2 weeks. And made sure that all the recordings were maximum possible, and the crew was on site, and the cameras were really in their best shape at that point. But again, this was a devising process. So things that came up, it was understood that these were able to influence the piece, and that we were able to figure it out. I think one of the big problems that we had was prevising this thing, and that's where Isadora came in as the solution to do that. I had thought what we were going to do is we collect the stems, and then we'd jump into Final Cut, or we'd jump into Premiere, and then we'd have a conversation with the director and figure it out. But we really determined that time needed to collapse down to a single point, where we needed to be looking at how the piece evolved and figuring out with the composite how to give notes back to the performers. And that was a tricky thing to figure out exactly what time meant in this process. I'll say on a personal note, it was real hard to be awake during all these periods of time. And we were also at multiple locations at different times. There were pieces of this performance where I was doing it from upstate New York, back in my studio here. Like, it was a lot of like figuring it out personally, how to do something like this over a period of time. I think we were able to keep the production pretty generally in check. But I will call out the really difficult hardware sourcing process during this period. I did not anticipate that. I knew it was going to be hard. I did not know it was going to be almost impossible to get any DSLR in Amsterdam. That blew my mind.
One of the things that we noticed when we were using Conduit a lot on set was the same thing that you were talking about, which is that being able to see something live just changed everything. Having that cycle rate be instant as opposed to a day or see it later or whatever. We would get the composites done, on set, that the director could say, is it going to be as good as that in the film? And we were like, yeah, it's going to be at least as good as that on the film. One more time. And so being able to kind of solve that and really see it makes a massive difference. Next question.
Back from Tlaluk. What was the most problematic moment in the project?
I think Jonathan and I will probably have different answers for this. For me, it was the internet at the Oregon location, because they had one up and one down, one when we first got out there. So we actually worked with the telecommunications provider in the Tiger Valley area, and we had people going up on structures and putting additional dishes, and it was this whole big thing. They got a fiber backhaul to one place, and then we extended that out into another building. It was a whole process to get Ganavya's internet up to speed, and eventually we did get it there. But it's really hard to rehearse the process when the video was just collapsing in on itself when we started the process. But it was one of those things where, like, you can't just move her. You can't just put her in a place that has better location, because this chapel has a significance to it. And it has an acoustical significance to it as well. I mean, it was this whole big high ceiling wooden structure aesthetically, and you'd have to pick up the whole thing and move it somewhere else, which was something that was tempting for quite a while, but not something we were able to do. So eventually we were able to work with the telecom providers. I was on multiple Zoom calls with them trying to figure out whether we were going to do like a point-to-point satellite from a fiber location down, or what that was going to look like. But eventually we were able to get about 100 up, 100 down.
That's great.
That was nice.
How did you get 100 up, 100 down?
I believe the final solution was they had a town nearby that had a fiber line in it, and then they had the way that the telecommunications company operated was they had a network of towers that had these transceivers on them, and they were sort of meshed together. And then coming out of the tower was a fiber line that would feed the town. So we were able to go up and have a dish adjustment to get down closer to the place where the location was, and then they fibered out of that. And then I think the last leg of it was copper, and they used the original infrastructure there. But because they were able to tie it back to a fiber box, we were able to get like 100 or something like that, which is plenty for what we needed to do. It was kind of a really, and then of course the whole state was on fire at the same time as all this was happening. So that was also, yeah, you know, there were days that we had to delay because the tower was on fire. And I was like, okay, great. Well, we're gonna have to figure something else out. So,
next question.
Next question comes from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. What percentage of your elements were live versus pre-recorded? Any elements you wish would have been done live or pre-recorded if you did it again?
I think, again, Jonathan and I might have different answers on this. I would have wanted the whole thing to be completely live because we were so close, because we had a live previs of the thing. I think what that's missing though is this beautiful B-roll. And I think that if I were to do this again, I would love to have like people with SRT lyrics feeds coming around from town, connected up to their RE rigs or whatever it is they're doing, or Blackmagic and all of that, and then tie that all back in and actually mix the full thing like a broadcast a little bit more, but with the aesthetic elements of what we were trying to achieve in the way that it was composited, versus like cutting on an AB bus. It was actually like, all right, everything goes into a blender and you figure out what comes out the other end. I like that movement. I think it could have been done live. And I think it would have been interesting to then tie in interactivity. So you got to get to live first, and then I think bringing in interactivity would have been the next step to that. I know they have some ambitions for what they're going to do with the way it's distributed and whether there can be participatory media in that. But I would have loved to have just opened up the box a little bit more. But that's the kind of thing now that I try to think about, like, what do I want to do as an artist? Like, that's the kind of stuff that would be exciting to me.
One more thing on that real quick. So one of the conversations early was being able to make this content available where you would have these 3 different feeds yourself as a viewer and be able to use your own sliders and interface to merge between them and to balance between them as you watch this piece. That would have involved some sort of web playback and a custom development on that. And that still is an option and something that's being considered, but I thought it was interesting.
For the techie people, we had thought about using HLS for that, and then instead of having different resolutions, have different stems, so that you have an HLS feed coming down, and then you would have been able to mix it. And we were going to have like Unity doing that. It was going to be a whole thing. But I think the other question that's related to this is like, should this be done again in a post-pandemic world? I know we're not quite there yet, but God willing, we get there, right? What is, and this is something that Jonathan and I have been talking about a whole lot, and is part of the reason that this was fresh of mind when we decided to do it for the second hour, is like, what if this is valuable in a world that you have the option of physical production again, and what if it isn't? Because it's a film project, right? Like we kind of intuitively understand that like a digital first event makes sense, and all of that. We understand that, but like, okay, when we're doing an asynchronous process and the delivery is filmed, does this type of medium have an effect on that? And that's a question that we're still going back and forth on ourselves, actually. Like, what if this actually matters for the long term?
We were doing pieces of this, before in the before times, there was that we had done lots of bits and pieces of that where we're doing more and more remote production. I mean, we had directors watching motion capture 15 years ago, so they'd sit there and they'd see the characters, the 3D characters we were pushing back to them over Skype, and they're watching the characters going. And so and what was funny was the directors got they found it very jarring to actually see the actor, because they're seeing the characters the whole time. And the actor would just, when the actor's looking at the character, it would be like this beast would be standing there looking at him, nodding like, okay. And he goes, I need you to go a little bit more this way. And he goes, okay, I'll do that. But he's used to talking to the beast, and then they see the actor and they thought it was very disorienting for them to actually go back to that. So I think that beyond the live, I think that we're going to see more and more of this kind of distribution. I do think that what you're talking about is having a live experience with the audience interacting. I was imagining, looking at this, of you could have multiple people doing calligraphy, or multiple people interacting with that, or even people meditating against, my wife works for a meditation center, so I think a lot about that. And so you could have a lot of things that were part of that experience, where you maybe have hundreds of people meditating while that is all going on, while it's all part of the, the
I'd love to talk to your wife at some point about this, because it is the piece is a meditation itself. And I think that's like the understanding collaborative meditation is the kind of thing that this really, like, once you close that gap, you've got a really interesting piece of live performance work.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with SRT Mini server is Windows only. Would raw FFmpeg be a substitute that could work on a Mac and Linux version?
Okay, I'll give it. So the answer to this one is yes, kind of. There was a huge falling out between NewTek and the developers of FFmpeg. A huge falling out, and it basically meant that NDI got stripped out of FFmpeg, and there was a lot of bad blood for a long time there, especially when this piece was coming together. So we had worked out a way to roll back enough versions and be able to bring in NDI to that and then roll SRT into that. And we had built our own fork of FFmpeg that combines NDI and SRT and the rest of the FFmpeg suite. And that was going to be the basis for Streamweaver Pro. Again, while you're technically correct, I think in the market as a whole, it's not the right solution. It's not the right solution at this moment because of Zoom and the capability of getting low latency video contribution at the resolution that's workable for the kind of media that we're doing here. Again, we don't need the full quality because we're recording locally onto the cameras. When it's time for the post-production process, we're never touching these feeds again. It didn't matter that it had the full quality of everything that was there. Again, the SD cards were just going to be mailed over to Tim, and he was going to put this together. So for Zoom, I'm willing to give up a little bit of quality. It's the latency that I really need at this moment and the synchronicity of the performance. So I would rather invest more time and energy into making robust NDI decoders, SDI, whatever it is for the Zoom platform than for FFmpeg and using SRT as the basis for that. Again, they have their place. This isn't it.
Next question.
Frank Hilgers in Naperville, California. How did the initial idea or decision for this project come about?
Oops, Jonathan, I'll let you double click. I'll let you chime in, Jonathan, if you remember more than I do. But my understanding was that this piece, Peter's familiarity with the Vimalakirti Sutra goes back 10 years, or more. It's something he'd been wanting to do for a while, and he had built a relationship with these performers, and they had begun the process long before we became involved. We became involved through our connection with the Fisher Center. We had been doing we had done our production of Mad Forest with them, which we then took off Broadway and did for a while there. And then we were actually on-prem with the Fisher Center for a while in September doing their festival of concert series that they were doing there. So our connection to this was very much through the idea that they had a piece that they wanted to do in a certain, and I'd love to learn at some point what the original plan for this piece was, because they were planning it prior to COVID, but it became part of it was a transition piece that this was the right moment to do it online. I can't even imagine what this would have looked like on an in-person kind of shoot, because this is where they discovered Zoom and all of that. And I think you can feel the presence of its context in the way that the piece was presented. So, but I know it's something they've been thinking about for a while. I think it's something they're still thinking about. Matter of fact, I learned this yesterday. The trailer I linked to you came out yesterday. I thought it's been out forever. And it came out yesterday because there's going to be a screening of it on October 9th. So if you look at the description of the trailer, actually we were screening this piece again. It had done a run at Sundance, and I thought it was had done its run for a while and was just existing in the hospital system. But if you want to see it, apparently it's going to be having another run. So we had decided to do this long before I knew that, so that was kind of interesting.
When is it? Do you know where and when?
I don't. It's in the description of the trailer. I'll have to find that, but it's in the video that was linked in the email.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Does the Liminal team ever hire remote contractors for implementations or support on projects? I'd be honored to have the opportunity to work with you.
So this sort of represents a pivot in the way that our business is structured. Again, after this moment, we realized that we were working on a lot of tools and ideas that we wanted to share with the wider community. So we call this productizing our services, basically, where we took the infrastructure that was used for Vimalakirti and other projects that we had done, and we created them into ZoomOSC and Streamweaver and ZoomISO and all of that. And we became very much a software company. Now we still do production work, and we still definitely work with productions. But to your question, Douglas, it's all referral at this point. We do some things here and there. We'll help supervise or help provide custom engineering or support. But we are pushing out everything that comes in to people that we know are qualified to work with, and that's why I'm excited to see this community engaging with Isadora more. Doing that kind of stuff, because once we build up the knowledge base in the community, it's very easy for us to say this is a good Isadora project and here's an expert that we know is available, and I'll put it in the job postings in Discord and somebody will pick it up and we'll give you the little thing that you need from us and you'll be good to go there. So we have a different approach to how we collaborate now than we did when we did this project, but it's even more based on community-based production than it was then. So while we're not strictly speaking a production company at this point, when we're more of a software company, that allows us to refer out and engage in the community a lot more.
Sorry, Mickey.
Oops, muted.
Go ahead.
Andy, how is Benjamin? Do you allow him to sleep? Do you feed him?
Actually, so Benjamin's doing well. He's I'll let him share more about what he's up to now, but he's in school and he's taking some time off. So this summer we sort of try to give him some space to be able to get acclimated to all of that, and I think he's doing well. So we're giving him some space right now to get adjusted to first year college. You know how that is. So but I think he's doing really well, and he's every now and then he's still pushing up stuff to the VitFocus companion repos for ZoomOSC and all of that. So he's doing a good job. We're just letting him adjust to a very different way of living.
Next question.
Tlaloc back with, I love the intentionality that seems to be at the center of this production. What was the biggest contribution to making this so clear in the results?
If I sort of understand what you're getting at, I think for me, a lot of that was the directing vision from Peter. Now, Peter, if you search for him in his name, he's a bit of a controversial figure in opera, and he's well known for taking traditional operas that have been around for hundreds of years and reinterpreting them in very controversial and he makes the papers often in opera circles, oftentimes very negatively for this. But I think part of that is because he has very much a distinct creative vision, and he wants to sort of express something without feeling constrained. This project, when I was first brought on, it really did seem strange to me. I mean, a 60-minute piece where you're staring at an actor lying down and a singer who doesn't move, and it didn't really seem to catch my interest and my attention span for that. But as it came together, and the fact that it's meant to be a meditative piece, and it's meant to be a narrative that you can watch, but a different kind of narrative, I think that was well pulled off and was effective. If you do get the chance to watch the full film, if that's released, you'll notice that it doesn't seem repetitive, even though it's some of the same imagery and some of the same concepts being repeated. The way it's mixed together has enough novelty to it, was able to tie together the whole piece. So I hope that sort of answers a bit of what
like a visual tension. I've been thinking about that a lot. It's like and Peter would tell me this in my ear when I was trying to mix this. He's like, he was talking all the time about like presence, and like more Ganavya, more Michael, like let me see the eyes or something like that. Like really and his whole thing was tension, that the conversation was not because we were cutting between a bunch of scenes and they were saying a bunch of different lines, and it was like this conversation piece. It was a global conversation, quote unquote, right? But it was a physical conversation that they were having, and it was visually a push and a pull. And when you watch the piece, that the way that the different emphasis, you feel worried for Michael at points. You think this guy's going to die because the way that the composite is set up, and then at other points you feel like this is a very open space, and a lot of it, you feel like there's really healing going on here. So, but it's not done through conversations and different scenes and shots. It's done through the way that they're all held together and pushed and pulled against each other. So it was a really interesting way of approaching things. Peter had a really incredible thought there, ahead of his time, I think, for the type of work that we're looking at.
Next question.
Stuart Fairweather in Melbourne, Australia. Is the implication of this that it is possible to do live drama or cinematic production via the tools that we have available today? And from there, could we run a news network through Zoom?
I think the simple answer is most certainly, and it's already being done. I mean, there's projects all over, both stuff we've done and stuff the community's doing. At the same time that Andy and I were working on this project, we also were engaging with some true live performance theater done through Zoom, things like the Moliere in the Park projects, and those were actors all over the world also being brought in, except that they were being brought in real-time graphics, and then that was then being streamed live to a live audience. So yes, it's being done, and I think back to what Andy said earlier, that the conversation that we have is really one of we know that Zoom and these contribution technologies can be fantastic for this real-time, not only collaboration, but real-time collection of content and then reprocessing that for live stream, and that's being done all over. What's interesting is to think about from the narrative filmmaking perspective, can this allow different different capabilities and maybe a speed or an efficiency of production. Something that comes to mind might be more of a documentary style where you need to do an interview, and rather than send a team out to go do that interview, is there a way that you could use the same kind of process to have a spread out film team able to access locations and share that video? I'm certainly very fascinated by the way that Zoom is trivially easy to contribute feeds to it, and then have any production crew member able to mix and match and create their own custom multi-view of whatever they need to see at that time. So I think there's a lot of impactful technologies within this that really make a lot of open possibilities.
Yeah, and for me, it's an aesthetic benefit as well. Like, let's not forget what we did here. I don't think you could fly Wang Dongling out. I don't think you could necessarily fly Ganavya out, and you certainly couldn't get that chapel, right? This was a piece that could only be done with people in remote locations, right? And it was one of those things where, like, maybe you could have the crew travel between places, but then you wouldn't have the synchronicity of that moment. And you could say, on one hand, maybe this is just I guess what I wonder is this a production that would have happened, or would it have even looked like this, right? And what are the kind of productions that are similar to this, again, aesthetically, when you can have people all over the world having an aesthetic contribution to the conversation? I've started to experiment with things like putting people in Rococo motion tracking shoots, having their motion capture data transported via Streamweaver and then projected out into a different location where they're dancing with somebody else who has the same system. So they're having a physical collaboration in space that doesn't actually exist, right? Like, are these the kind of things that we can start to do now that we've understood this medium, that creates a new type of visual versus just tries to, imitate a existing type of medium with a remote production to make it more efficient? I think the answer is yes to both. I think we can take conventional production and streamline it and cut the costs and make it work really well by taking advantage of these capabilities. But I also think you can make new kinds of performances and new types of visuals and media when you lean into the capabilities that you have exclusively in the online ecosystem.
And when you want to think about a mirror, you can just think about theater going to film. We started with, hey, we're going to have theater and people perform, and we'll have these cameras. And this is, 120 years ago or whatever. And it was like, we're going to have all these performances together. And then we realized we don't have to do them all at the same time. We don't have to do it all, we don't have to do them all with all the people in the same place. Oh, we can put the cameras on things, we can move them. And so we, and we have to remember that happened over 20 years, that we went from, we're going to shoot a play to silent films, and then another 80 years it was The Matrix. So the thing is that, but this is going to be much faster, and I do think that we are moving to a place where you can do things that you can never do in one place. Next question.
We really wrap up time. It's a comment from Sky, and he says, congratulations for this creative content. With the tools you had in 2019, 2020, this is a great example of creative and tech, and just says thank you.
Thank you, Sky. I appreciate that. If you want to learn more about this project or other projects that we've done, you can visit the About Us page on Liminal's website. You can see a video that contains samples from a bunch of different content that we did, and then there's a gallery at the bottom of the page where you can click on different projects that we worked on and read up a little more about them. I'll try to figure out what the details are for this screening of Vimalakirti that's coming up, so you can check it out. Again, I just learned about it myself, so go
let us know. We want to definitely make sure people know when it is. What would be fun is if we went individually to the screenings. Like, I assume it's online. It's an online screening.
That would be my assumption. Yeah.
What would be fun is we could do the online screening. We could do the I don't know. Maybe it's not fun, but it would be, if we watched it twice, we could do the Mystery Science Theater version where you guys explain things to us. But
yeah, that'd be fun.
I see you as the artist, and that these tools are your instrument, your current instrument. And the comment that was running in my head is, I think I watched you setting lead type. And that we've moved way past lead typesetting into this new set of tools. But in 18 months, what we've been able to do. And Jonathan, it's so great to meet you. And the collaboration is the key word there. And the limitations of time and space are no longer our limitations. So wow. Thank you.
And I think it was exciting for us today. We talk a lot about office hours, and this comes right from Alex, about the global conversation, right? And we talk a lot about event production and how to have like a very a conversation that's very, in a very literal sense, like somebody is talking to somebody else and somebody else is responding to them. What I'm hoping we were able to introduce today was the idea that you can have a similar type of conversation, but aesthetically. And using the same tools and ideas that we have, we can engage with our humanity and sort of that sense of spirit, and it's still a conversation that's happening across the world.
Thanks, Andy. And Jonathan, any last words? Any last things you're left with there?
Yeah, I mean, Andy summarizes it well. From my perspective, I'm very much interested in the art, but also focused on a lot of the technical accomplishments. And while we say the technology is here, we also know in our heads that there's a lot of steps that need to come. I'm interested in how this process scales up. If you add things like Frame.io's camera to cloud solution, and how would that implant itself into a process like this? Thinking about scale as well, we only had 3 locations with 4 cameras. What if we added more cameras in each location? What if we had 4 cameras at each location with different operators? And what if we had 10 different locations instead of 3? The limit, it doesn't really exist at this stage because you're just adding new locations, tying them into the Zoom. Zoom can handle these kind of video feeds. So I think that the way the brain works and the way I'm thinking of these expanded concepts is what really excites me.
That's great. Very good. And by the way, one of the things where a bunch of us are starting to scheme is doing a live performance, a play or a scene over Zoom. So just keep it in the back of your head.
Call me.
Yeah. So we're just warning everybody that this is also an introduction to how are we going to do this. So anyway, so we're thinking through that. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. It was really, really great to have that breakdown. Really inspiring. Thanks to our producers who asked a lot of great questions, kept it all going, and both first hour and second hour. And thanks to our panelists as always for a great conversation. We did it again somehow. Again, 500 and whatever times. And so well done. And now tomorrow we're going to talk about Flow 8. Should be interesting. And we'll break that down. And until then, we'll have after hours starting now.